welcome to episode 10 of the Discovery Files. Today, we're going to be interviewing Dale Sanderson. Dale was a senior geologist at St. Ives during the time of the Invincible discovery. And I'll turn it over to you, Dale.
Thanks for inviting me here. It's been really great listening to everyone I used to work with and all the great times they had and everything people had to say about us and really just I guess like from my perspective I really like the idea that you're going to be I guess delving into a little bit what is discovery, what is not just obviously mine discovery but even scientific discovery and even like some of the philosophy behind that and yeah, so just as a start off, if you want, I can give you a bit of a quick rundown. Um, if you've listened to the Aaron Megas episode, he mentioned he was going through the graduate program, and I was another graduate beneficiary at St Ives. I was I was actually employed very briefly in 2004. So not that long after St Ives had actually got their hands on, Goldfields got their hands on St Ives from WMC. Um, I took a bit of a risk, and so did my wife. We took a bit of a risk, came over to Kambalda really as a contractor, and I was employed by the site geochemist, Kylie Prendergast at the time, to operate a PEMA machine, basically looking at regolith. And I was doing that for approximately 30 minutes in the office up on Red Hill there, and Neil Jones, exploration geologist, burst into the office and says, "Hey, you're a geo. I've got an echo rig. Let's go." And then that was the start of my career on the graduate program. So you can imagine coming over from very mild climate in Victoria and Melbourne, where it rains more often than not, and then next week, 45 degrees on the Salt Lake, echo rig, time to become a geologist. And it was really great that Neil supported me, I guess, and got me into that graduate program because I still maintain that honestly, that graduate program is the best way to turn someone with an academic knowledge of geology into a really well-rounded mine geologist or an exploration geologist. And yeah, so the next couple of years after 2004, so I started as I mentioned, I started in exploration, mainly on an echo rig. And I went through three rotations. I started off in exploration, then I went to Argo Underground. Got a lot of underground experience there that was really invaluable as well. And then rotated into open pits. And so you start off with a university graduate who's only seen one Archean rock before in their life, to having a geologist who can log regolith, log transported cover, can do some wireframing. I can do some resource mapping, and I can do I can look at underground drives. I can tell you about ore bodies underground, high grade ore bodies. I can go into a paleo channel and tell you about that. I can do all of these things, reconcile tons and all this kind of stuff. And I really maintain that that's one of the rotating someone through those three really different environments is a really invaluable way to invest in a person and then get a return on that investment.
For some reason, when I worked with you, I thought you had worked at a variety of other companies because you were really well rounded. You had all these different skill sets. So I had no idea that you started off in that graduate program. I mean, like you might have
Yeah,
told me, and I
yeah.
forgot because I forgot more than I ever learned. But that's actually an incredible testament to it because I just remember always being impressed with how well rounded you were, and I didn't realize it was through St.
Oh,
Ives.
thank you.
So,
Yeah, well, I think it's fair to say they got their money back. I know that the other thing you were mentioning before about getting, I think one of your previous ones, getting kids in some cases to operate on drill rigs or whether it's or in mine sites and so on. I remember when I got to my underground placement, and the person training me up was actually the VAC student, and I was like, whoa, okay, this person's only here for 4 months, and they've got seniority over this critical like ore control process. They're showing me how to use the ROM, like what's the ROM pad, how do we do the sampling, and I was like, wow, okay, this is going to be exciting. But I mean, look, like when you work underground, you get to walk around inside a high grade ore deposit, walk around inside it, and you just, it's hard to really convey what that experience is like. But it teaches you what are the characteristics of a high grade ore body. And if you're going to then go into exploration and go into discovery and go and look for these things, and you've walked around inside them, I think that's a really important point. And Aaron was saying before about cave rocks as well, and that feeling you get of camaraderie when you're part of a team. in a production team in a high pressure environment. Um, and yeah, it really just does want to incentivizes you to succeed, I think. And so yeah, that was my how I started off with Goldfields. I then went into become an exploration geologist in 2007. And we had I think it's fair to say, a smaller team at that point. I was working a lot with Ned Stoltz, who was our site geophysicist. He ended up moving on to Geoscience Australia, and I actually did a small stint I took over for him in some ways as a site geophysicist there. We conducted a bunch of different surveys. So I spent 3 years in the exploration role there. And something, I mean, something I'll get onto maybe a little bit later, but one of the highlights there for me was just drilling the Discovery program and the RC program that was the start of the Hamlet um, mine, which is still operating now. I didn't drill the Discovery hole, and I'd like to get onto that a bit later maybe, but really, I remember bringing back the chip trays into my exploration manager's office, Matt Briggs, and he looked at them, and he's completely poker face. One day, I mean, if you ever get to meet Matt Briggs, it's really it's something you remember. Completely poker face under all circumstances. He's looking at these chip trays. He looks down at them. He looks back at me, and then he just looks down at chip trays again. He says, "This looks like a gold deposit," or something like that. And he was playing it very calm, very stone faced. But I remember what he was actually doing behind the scenes. He was actually checking the status of those assays, like with hourly. He was refreshing that link, looking at those. And when I got in the next day, he said, "Come in here, have a look at this." And he showed me the assay results, and I was like, "Oh yeah, that's quite good." But he knew he had the experience to know the difference between, "Oh yeah, that's quite good," and this is the start of potentially of a mine. So that was my highlight really as an exploration geologist. And then 3 years in that role. I also went on secondment to Finland at a slightly different time to Nick. We sort of had very small crossover. But again, this is, I guess, yet another example of ongoing sustained investment that Goldfields had in its employees, really giving you broadening your horizons. Let's get you in another country. We can get your skills. We can cross pollinate your skills with the people who we've got in Finland. It's a completely different style of deposit. It's got all these. It's got base metals. It's got nickel. It's got copper. It's got all these other things. You can provide your experience to them in wireframing and modeling, and your experience managing drill rigs, and then you can see this completely different deposit. And then at the end, the idea is you make this investment in your staff, and I think you get back a better employee at the end, and that's an investment. It's not a cost. They'll pay you back if you believe in them, and I think that we really benefited from that. And then towards the end of 2010. Actually, while I was in Finland, I actually interviewed for the senior role with Julian. So Julian had since taken on the role as exploration manager from Matt Briggs, and I was fortunate enough to get that. And yeah, stayed on as senior until I think 2011 was when I finished as project geologist, and then yeah, until 2014, I think I stayed on at St Ives. And that was at the time that we overlapped, and we had a great amount of success, I think, in that period as well. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
So one question there: why Goldfields? Why did you pick Goldfields in the end?
um, well, you say pick Goldfields. It's,
Or
do,
why did they? I guess the more pertinent question might be why did they pick you
yeah,
along the
yeah.
way? But
So
anyway,
that's another interesting story as well. And I know you talked about like the role of fate and the role of chance in some of your earlier podcasts as well. But essentially, it was word of mouth. So Nick Van Claveren, who we've already mentioned as um, the exploration geologist who was essentially responsible for the Air Corps program that had the discovery hits over
hmm
Invincible, actually was employed by Goldfields as a contractor before I worked for Goldfields, and he knew I just graduated from university, and he also knew that there was this role coming up to operate this Pima machine that was going to be sitting there zapping mud and looking at the regolith. And he said, "Oh, just put your resume in, and I'll drop in a good word for you." So it was actually Nick who got me the role, and it all just went from there. So I have Nick to thank for in some ways, my entire career as a geologist. So
yeah,
I
wow.
think this whole podcast has Nick to thank for this, right?
sponsored by Nick Van Clever.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's kind of fascinating how one person can have an impact on so many different people, right? And that's one of the things I've really enjoyed is hearing essentially people's experiences with Nick, like not just as an exploration geologist, but as a person as well. It's just like, like you just can't say enough for people like that, right?
Mm.
That's really cool that
Yeah.
you got to the initial start there.
Yeah, yeah, and then I had also had uh, the, um, the privilege to later on when we're looking for geos, exploration geos, of course, it made complete sense to get back someone who knew the site already very well, and I knew had the skills, and so eventually I was able to ask Nick if he would come and join our team later on, and then obviously, he was in the exploration team for quite a few years, based out of Kambalda, so yeah.
Yeah, cool.
So,
Um, yeah.
you'd already been involved in it was Athena and you like were at
Mm,
Hamlet as well. And so
yeah.
then when you saw like, these initial Air Corps hits come out and over because actually I remember talking to you about like I'll always remember when we were doing a different it was like that sonic program and we were looking at
Oh, yeah.
a paleo channel and I just remember I was looking at the tubes of mud at the core farm
Mhm.
and you coming up and going they're drilling in the wrong place and I was like how do you know that and you were like looking at it and you could tell from the sequence of what you were expecting that they were off target so I always remember just how well you knew not just the geology, but all these different aspects of things. And so when you saw like the initial Air Corps come back over Invincible, like what did you think? What was your experience with that?
Um, I I mean, I'm definitely not gonna take, any credit for it in terms of the targeting. I think I think I mean, we can get into this maybe a little bit later, or maybe we can get into it now, but I really think that the, um, the success that mine site really, experienced for a period between, I guess, 2006 and I'd say 2014 was really all thanks to the architecture, the landscape of exploration that was really designed by Matt Briggs. That's my personal opinion. I think before that time, um, yeah, before that time, I'm not sure how much success was had. I mean, there was certainly a lot of operating mine sites, but a lot of those mine sites were found a long time ago, and then there was a big slew of new mine sites discovered thanks to some really clever geology from WMC and particularly geophysics. Sort of revolutionized. If you could when you could quickly acquire new targets with geophysics, that led to a whole bunch of new mine sites being discovered. But I really think that the sustained investment and um, the sustained belief in good science and good stuff from around about I'm going to say around about 2006, um, and the recognition that that investment wouldn't have an immediate payoff. Like it's not gonna you're not gonna put someone on a geophysics course and then next year it's worth 5 million ounces to the company. That person's going to need to develop and you're going to need to test targets and turn them over and so on and so on and so it's a recognition that you had someone in the exploration manager role, I believe, who said fundamentally how does exploration work? What do we need to know, what do we need to know in order to find an economic gold deposit? And that sounds like a really trite, simple question, but it's actually extraordinarily complicated. And who do we need to ask? I mean, the number of initiatives that Goldfields got involved with, both universities all across Australia, governments all across Australia, at all different levels during that time period was really kind of staggering. And the number of experts we would have come through. If we needed a geochem expert, well, we'd get Scott Halley to come to site, and he would give a geochem tutorial and lecture to our exploration geologists. If we needed a structural geologist, then they would come to site. Steve Cox would come to site, and he would tell us all about how earthquakes make structures, and these are the things that are filled with gold. And if we needed a regolith expert, we would get like Ravi Anand or someone from CSIRO to come in who's wrote the book on what is regolith, how does it form, what the anomalies that you're looking for, what do they tell us, and I really think that the blueprints and the foundation of that period of success where we really found in a period of maybe say 8 years, we found four world-class gold deposits, um, is thanks to that initial focus on what do we need to know and how can we achieve that. And I think in one of your earlier episodes, you touched on this kind of like exploration paralysis that can occur. It's too overwhelming. Like, how can we do this? There's so many places. It's an infinite number of places to drill. Infinite number of places to drill. And we've only got a limited budget, and it's just impossible. And it's very easy to get stuck in that kind of thinking. But Matt Briggs was more like, no, figure out what we need to know. We need to know about the fundamental stratigraphy of our mine site. We need to know fundamentally of where the structures exist on our mine site, and how do we achieve that? Like, we can't achieve it all at once, but how do we do it? Well, and then just throw everything at it. And I said, it's people like I think, like you mentioned before, Malcolm Jolly, who we had as an MRM manager, who's got to back up that plan, right? That's a very brave plan to have in a time when you may have a fluctuating gold price. You may have, and you may have people up on the board who's look at this new investment we've got over in Australia and say, oh, gee, did we make the right choice there? And Malcolm's got to take the vision that Matt has and sell that to people higher up the chain who probably don't have a science background. Maybe they've got a finance background, or maybe they're engineers, and tell them this is the right strategy. And it's not going to pay off. That you've got to convince someone it's not going to pay off, 2 years time or 4 years time, but maybe 6 years time or 10 years time, and we'll reap the rewards. And I really believe that not just the Invincible deposit, but also Hamlet and the Athena discovery, Invincible, and all of those other really significant discoveries, which were fundamentally different to anything we had on site, was thanks to that sustained fundamental science that was really um, it was really provided to all of the people on the exploration team.
So
Uh,
Dale, you gave a pretty good background into, like, I guess, why the business went down a certain path. Did you ever feel that the business questioned whether it was on the right path or not? Like, did you ever feel that tension where
Mm,
people either internally or externally thought, maybe we should change this, or we should get different people, or something along those lines?
um, I guess it's a kind of because again it was a bit strange for me because it was really my first role in the industry, and I kind of just normalized everything. I think, oh, this is just what exploration geology is like. This is just what mine geology is like everywhere. It must be just like this. And so I kind of had this naive assumption that this kind of investment was universal. And I'm almost certain it's the exception rather than the rule. But there were times that I guess when you're talking about conflicts and where we're making the right strategic decisions. Ironically, one of the greatest internal um, stresses, I guess, to put on certainly the funding for exploration is when you have a success. If you make if once you've got the discovery hole and you've got a couple of framework holes and you think you're onto something, suddenly your entire exploration budget will be rediverted to that one project, and the recognition from the senior management that that is actually a risk because we used to refer to it as the pipeline. We have this pipeline of targets that are very green fields and they have a very high failure rate. And if you take all your money now and you do nothing but drill out this one project, then next year you won't have any new discoveries. And the year after that, you probably won't either. And if all of that resource drilling doesn't come through, then what have you gained? And so the conflict we had was really trying to balance that, how to grow a new discovery, and that happened again and again. That happened with Athena. I think you mentioned that as well, Scott. That we had also had some issues around gold price and understanding of that ore body, but and it happened again when we found Hamlet, and then it happened again when we found Invincible as well. Is how do we convince how do we convince management that we need to sustain the original plan of testing greenfields targets where that's where the big ones are going to live. I mean, if you're drilling right next to your mine, you might get an extension of that mine, and then you have to keep doing that's essential. But if you want to find a new thing, you've got to look somewhere where no one's looked, right? And that involves that sustained greenfield spend. And I think people like Malcolm and people like Matt were quite instrumental in maintaining that high turnover of greenfields targets. And so I guess in terms of conflicts, there were definitely times when I thought to myself, especially when we had to lay off staff, uh, I don't think this is the best long-term decision. But broadly speaking, we're really well supported. So I didn't really have that many. crises.
Yeah, okay. It's interesting you say about like, the fact that like, like when you have a discovery, it leads to this increase in funding. Like an ex-colleague of mine that once told me, he's like, discovery is a good way to spend a lot of money and have no friends or a lot of friends at the end. So, like, and then he said, but you're right though, in that, because especially in green fields, like, when you are onto a discovery, the pressure ramps up, particularly from a financial point of view, to like drill this thing out. And then if the results don't show up, then like a lot of people have barracked really hard for you to get to
Yeah,
that point.
yeah,
And it creates this kind of issue where like the lost aversion kind of way of like, well, we don't want to get too far down this hole, but other people are like, well, we now finally have something, let's just figure out what we have,
yeah,
etc. And we
yeah.
kind of covered this, and I always forget the other deposit, the deposit that was found in the same area,
Incredible.
the
Yeah,
other
so
battleship.
incredible, yeah.
Incredible. Yeah, that's
And
uh,
it's interesting because initially, like to go back to wind back in time, my first stint as a very green and sunburnt exploration graduate on an air core rig on a salt lake, wearing very short shorts, which are no longer industry standard. Um, uh, yeah, back in those days, we were told I was, I was having, I was had, I finally got some free time and I was doing some targeting, and that was really fascinating to me, and I really loved that. And I came up with this target, and I said, I think I've got the structural story here, and I think we've got this and we've got that. And I took it to my project chair, and he said, "That's great, but you know what? It's not in a dolerite, so let's just can it." I think it's a great target. He said it. He said, "I think that's a great target, and I think it's probably mineralized, but it's not in dolerite, so it's not going to get drilled." So that's just sort of highlights the change that had to happen from when I started in 2004 to the point where people understand what makes an economic gold deposit, at least on that mine site. It had to be a lot of very academic and a lot of hard work and a lot of good science to realize that you can have these fantastic gold deposits, not just in these dolerites, which were found very competently by geophysics, but it's very easy to do a mag survey and find a fractionated dolerite with a structure running through it, where the magnetite's destroyed, and that's where the gold lode is, and A plus B equals C, and then suddenly you've got a gold mine. But guess what? All of those easy ones, they're gone, and that's
Yeah.
they were gone.
I
They
remember
were gone. They were gone when Goldfields bought it.
Yeah,
They're
I
already
mean,
developed.
we were testing those ideas still even when I was there, and none of them panned out, right? Like, they looked beautiful in the geophys, and none of them panned out, and it's such an interesting combination of events that leads to go from, discovering Indolerites to in the Black Flags of all things, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And and I go like we talked about it a number of times, how many little things had to go just right, right? Like think if Matt Briggs hadn't been in that role and led that change in thinking, which is a long-term strategic change, which it takes a special kind of person to make those long-term strategic things, because you have to do a little bit every day or every week to push that direction. You can't just wait and have it all of a sudden pivot. Like, you actually have to shove to get the Titanic to turn away from the iceberg, right?
yeah,
And so
and definitely, yeah, definitely part of that is understanding that geochemical data and collecting multi-element data in particular was absolutely critical. If you're going to come up with this genetic model of how gold deposits form, you need to know what a near miss looks like, and you need to know what other pathfinder elements, not just gold. Gold's a good indicator of gold, but I mean, if you're just next to the gold, you need to know what else is there, because the gold itself is only in one very small place. Um, and just to take Aisha to task a little bit when someone gave her feedback, it's like, oh yeah, wow, well done, you found a gold deposit at St Ives. Well, I mean, it's 380 square miles, and your RC bit is what, 4 inches or something, and your chances of finding the thing that you want in that kind of terrain, when people have been exploring really hard for over 120 years, and then you're blindfolded because the entire site is covered by between 30 and 80 meters of tertiary sand. uh, I would argue that it's not quite as easy as someone said shooting fish in a barrel. Maybe it's a little bit harder than that.
I had the same reaction to that. Is easy to look back in hindsight and say, "Oh, well, you've made all these discoveries, so therefore discovery is easy there." But I've worked in a number of districts that I looked at the same thing, like where you have swamps and you have, areas that are difficult to access, and everybody's only done the exploration for what they've already found, which is kind of like looking for the Dolerites, right? And I go, the difference is people continued to branch out. People continued to say, "All right, if it's not here, where else might we find one? What other science do we need to do to lead us towards that?" And so actually I had the exact same reaction as you where I was kind of put out where it was like they've also had a lot of years without success there that
Mm,
led
yeah,
them to change and to say what do we actually have to do different to improve our success rate, and then they did it. Right, so
yeah,
so
yeah.
I would say there's a number of camps and districts that have just as much potential but haven't had that systematic exploration methodology applied to improve their discovery success.
Yeah, and so really what was instituted was a very thorough and intentional stratigraphic exercise where we would go and get air core and we would go and get end of hole multi-element geochemistry. So we could tell we could fingerprint after a lot of hard work. We could fingerprint exactly where we were in the stratigraphy with multi-element geochem, and the realization that a dolerite. So you got a mafic cell that's fractionated. Well, guess what? We've got a bunch of mafic basalts, and lo and behold, and when you stack up a bunch of mafic basalt, it also kind of fractionates, and there are preferential zones within those basalts. You've just now gone from an exploration space of say 5% of your leases to 40% of your leases just by that realization. And the irony for me was I think the initial thing that Nick was actually chasing the geochemical anomalies and the slight gold anomalism as well that turned out to be invincible was out, as you mentioned, in the Black Flags. And I was told that, honestly, the Black Flags and the Marugals and were pretty much post gold deposition. So why would you bother
Yeah.
looking there? And what always got me as a young exploration geologist was there was a known deposit called I shouldn't use the term deposit because the resource geologists there will be spitting in their graves, but it's a what should I call it, a resource?
An
It's a thing.
occurrence.
Yeah, it's a gold occurrence called loot, and how do I put this? We had this term on site where you have exploration prospect. It's a zombie, and you can shoot it and you can shoot it and it just won't die and it keeps getting resurrected and coming back at you. And then someone will say, "Oh, I'll put another RC hole in and it'll figure it out." And then it goes down and it comes back again. Anyway, but that was in the same stratigraphy, and it's just a long strike from Incredible, which is just a long strike from Invincible, right? And so the recognition that, well, obviously you can get mineralized sediments there, and B, um, you know, follow these gradients. If it's a tungsten anomaly, I don't know what it was. I can't remember specifically that what Nick was chasing up. But yeah, then just follow the data, follow the science, and that's really, I think, a lot of hard work. And also, just again, to hark back to some of your earlier episodes, I know you talked about serendipity and I guess the role that chance has to play. And I guess I'd like to touch on that a little bit while we're sort of in the thing. And you mentioned Nick going to on secondment just as that air core program was conducted and the results were coming back and it all ramped up very quickly. And I guess I would like to advocate that I kind of feel that if you have the right approach, it's not a random process. I kind of really feel that it's not really a random process at all. I feel like it feels like a random process, like when you go into a casino, right? If you're in Reno or you're in, I don't know, somewhere, and you walk into a casino, you see games of chance in inverted commas everywhere. But the house doesn't view that like it's a random occurrence. The house knows that they will always win over time. Time plus opportunity equals like return on investment. So they do everything they can and then everything that they need to understand how the people play the games and this kind of thing. And I would argue that that this investment that Goldfields made in its people and good science and collaboration with universities, collaboration with government, each one of those pieces of the puzzle shifts that 1 in 1 million to 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000, 1 in 10,000, maybe 1 in 9,000, 1 in 8,000, 1 in 5,000, and each time you add another one of these components in there, you're reducing from being a random activity to, I know it's a guarantee, but much, 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 much more certain than simply pointing an RC rig at the cardinal compass point and driving forward. And that's, I think that really sort of paid off in that 8-year period where we had these four major discoveries.
My
I think
my
that's
favorite saying about, like, people that say that, yeah, like luck and serendipity and stuff like that, is the old Gary Player like, quote. So Gary Player, golfer, if you don't know, yeah, like he was once asked by this reporter that, like, he seemed to be the luckiest golfer around, because he seemed to, like, get quite lucky on golf course. And Gary Player's like retort to that was, he's like, it's amazing. The more I practice, the luckier I get.
Yeah,
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 like at the end of the day, like that's really the difference between luck and serendipity,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Serendipity, you got to be doing something, and then you get the opportunity to take advantage of the opportunity that you kind of have in front of you. But unless you do something, you're never going to get that opportunity.
yeah.
So,
And our
I think
version
that's
of that was these amazing targeting workshops, which now that I look back on it, were really amazing. We would have industry experts. We would get all the exploration team together, and we'd get the structural expert, and we'd get the site geophysicist, and we'd have everything, every tool we needed, and we would sit there for days and just say, right, let's look at this site like it's brand new and fresh eyes, and we'll come up with new targets. And we know we've got a turnover. We know but the success rate of finding new deposits in the industry. We know we have to turn over 100 targets a year. So make that a KPI, and then put that KPI in people's individuals KPIs. And so we know we have to test that many targets. We're going to resource it, and that resourcing is going to be sustained, and it's going to be over a certain number of years. And it just fundamentally opened up the entire lease package to new exploration. So I
it's a
believe
good
that philosophy was really justified.
no, it's a really good point. Like it's quite profound, like with like, I think it was Pasteur that said, chance favors the prepared mind. And that those activities were deliberate choices because we talk about like, is there a recipe book you can make to improve, like success and exploration, right? Those targeting workshops, those things are deliberate choices you make to help yourself down the road. Not maybe not tomorrow, maybe not even next month, maybe not even next year, but every time you do one of those things, you're improving your odds, right? And I kind of think about that where I don't know. I guess it's interesting to hear your perspective. Where I thought maybe that was like a handover from WMC, but it sounds like that's actually more of a creation of Goldfields, and maybe with
No, I
Matt
think very
Briggs.
much. Yeah. And I don't want to downplay Julian's impact, especially around as you're talking around the resource conversion and discovery and expansion of the new deposits that were found. I think he really was a good choice in terms of it. I think he described himself as more a man of action, and you needed someone like that who wasn't necessarily thinking 10 years. If you've got a problem that's immediate, you need someone who can deal with that problem immediately and not think about
Yeah,
maybe the 10-year plan. So I think at that time he was a very good exploration manager to have there. Um, Particularly like I said, we're going from resource drill out to resource drill out to resource drill out while trying to maintain an effective exploration team is not easy. And the and building the highways. Honestly, the highways on top that we built on the Salt Lake. I know Steve touched on that as well. And that's an important point. Is when you free up experts to do their job by giving them really good assets like Steve, who's managing the team of fieldies, and they have more time to find gold deposits, which is what you want them to do, right? So, I mean, yes, a geologist should know how to collect samples, and yes, they should know how to do all the assay and whatever else and all the other things. Yes, they should know how to rack and unrack core, whatever it is you want them to do. But if you can free up their time, you've just invested in this person, you've trained them up, you sent them to these workshops, they're now an expert, and then you get them doing something like admin, or you get them doing something that's honestly, it's part of your exploration strategy is not just to ensure that your science is sustained over a long period of time, but it's to free up the experts to do the thing that they do. So yeah, we couldn't have
and it's
done that much work at all without a massive support staff.
and I think that's one of my when I look back at St. Ives, that was one of my favorite parts of it because it was so different from my previous experience where, like, I worked for the juniors and I had to do everything, right? And,
Mm,
like, we
mm.
had, like, Ashley that would do all these things for us. We had Chris that would do all the GIS. Like, and I think that's the thing is, we'll never be able to talk to all the people involved in St. Ives, right? And give credit for all the people that deserve credit. But all of those people made it so that our time was freed up to focus on what we were good at, and they focused on what they were good at. And it was like a well-oiled machine, right? And I kind of thought like, oh, this is just how it goes with bigger companies, and it is not the way it's gone with other companies I've worked for. It was
Yeah,
very
yeah,
much and that's a whole company culture outside of just the exploration culture that's been set up to provide the resources so that people are more effective at what they're good at. And I would say it paid off in spades, right? Like there's not one or two discoveries we're talking about in this 10-year
yeah,
period. There's what, six? You
yeah,
know?
yeah. I mean, Hamlet's still operating, and I think they did mine Athena, although I think initially they had some issues with getting it to hang together, but they did end up mining it. Yeah, like I said, just changed the entire exploration landscape by taking a risk, drill really deep stratigraphic holes that you're not necessarily going to find the deposit. We don't. That's not the target. The target here is to understand the fundamental architecture of the rocks, and can they help us find a new deposit? I mean, when I talk, after just telling you, I think it's less chance and more design. I am going to say that the geologist who had the discovery hole I was going to allude to earlier, discovery hole for Hamlet, um, Andrew Dunn, aka Junior, he drilled one of these stratigraphic framework holes, and it was in a great like we just discovered Athena. We just realized, okay, this basalt can be really prospective now if we understand it, but you've got to understand it. And so he targeted this basalt, and he targeted it in a great spot, and he drilled this really deep diamond hole, and then he went on holiday, and it sat on the racks, and it sat there, and then someone said to me, "Look, we need to get it off the racks. It's taking up too much space. Just go and log it." I went and longed and logged it. And there was a lot of boring rocks in this hole. And and there was a tiny structure, one tiny little structure in there. It was 2 meters wide, 2 meters at 3 grams a ton, I think it was. That's the discovery intercept of Hamlet. But because of the training that I've received, because of the targeting, all the investment in my knowledge as an exploration geologist, I was like, well, this structure's seen mineralized fluids. I mean, why don't I just project this to surface? And I'll project it to surface in a place where it's got the best chance of having economic gold, because now we know these basalts have a better zone and a worse zone for hosting gold deposits. And so that's all I did is I just took Junior's targeted diamond hole, projected it upstrike near surface, and lo and behold, like the next RC program was full of, you know, over 100 gram meter intercepts. Um, so
So what I'm hearing here is it's critical for the people who plan programs to go on vacation because or on secondment.
Yeah, exactly. That's the key, the one key uniting factor. When you plug that into your AI model, that's what the AI model will tell you, right? The AI
Exactly.
model, you'll do your generative model, and it will have a cluster over here. What's this cluster? Oh, yeah, geologists on vacation, and then that's what that's going to tell you.
Send them all.
That's
But it's like, what are the odds as well, where I think about because like, I've done plenty of attempts at doing that over the years where you see a structure, you have an orientation on it, and you go, "Okay, here's where I project it to be, where there's gonna be a really good favorable host rock." And the vast majority of those end up in failure, or maybe they end up in smoke and you vector in, but it's so rare to have that actually turn into like, "Oh, yeah," and then we were off to the races, right? So the
yeah.
good on you for that. That's
The
pretty impressive.
the critical. I mean, again, the critical luxury is working at a site which had the budget and the management commitment to that sustained program. So you would turn it the it's really important to know what you need to have an economic deposit, but it's equally important to know when you have a zombie. And like when can you kill these things fast? This whole phrase we have now, this modern phrase is fail fast, fail forward. Like you hear this all the time in elite business speak, like over like tech company thing is pharmaceutical buzzword, whatever it is. Like that idea has been around for a very long time. Fail fast but recognize failure quickly, move on to the next thing, and that's really critical. I think one thing the exploration strategy did really well was define success. When you propose a drill program, have a really clear number on a page. It has to do this thing. To proceed to the next level, you must do this. Also, on the same page, if it doesn't do this thing, it dies, right? And those two things together, um, you know, if it dies, cool, get rid of it, put the next one up, and let's go. And having a really balanced portfolio of green targets. Again, this is back to this pipeline concept that management had, was really critical because they know that once it hits about milestone 3, that's kind of the end of the road for a lot of really promising ideas because then you can actually start to put together an actual resource model on this thing, and that's the hard part. Going from an
Yeah,
idea to a model, yeah, that's where the hits the road sort of thing. So
yeah. Um, So I remember when we were there, like I actually didn't realize you'd been promoted to senior. I think right before I got there. And then I was a project G at the start, and then I got promoted to senior. But I remember you and I sat down at one point. It was probably over a B movie because we used to sit and watch B movies all the time. Like
yeah, I
what was
think
that New Zealand one with the zombie sheep? Like whatever that
Black
was
Sheep,
that was amazing.
definitely worth a
Yes,
watch. Black Sheep,
yes.
yeah, yeah.
For all listeners, please go check that out. That's fantastic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's
but
Peter
but
Jackson,
I
right? But
remember
anyway.
I think so, yeah. But I think, like, one of the things that struck me is you and I sat down and kinda communicated, like, what our strengths and weaknesses were and how we could work better together, and, um, and I felt that was a big turning point in my personal success at that project is 'cause I feel like it's I've got a lot of weaknesses that I need to offset and I've got strengths too. But I think like having that open conversation with it like set up our team for better success. But I don't know what was your thoughts on that? Like did you feel that those kind of uh sit downs to discuss like how we wanted things to move forward and try to be more intentional, do you feel that worked well or what
Yeah,
was
I
what was
do, and I
your
do, and I think again part of that you've already alluded to as well is the diversity on the team. So we had people with a lot of experience, and we had graduates as well. People with not just like diversity of personality, but diversity of work history, but all sorts of things. And I would describe myself as definitely not a manager. Um, so my main management style was to try and keep I always told everyone this. I was quite open about it. My management style was to all I had to do was keep upper management away from my exploration geos, and then they could go and do their things as much as possible. So if I could take all of the emails and all of the admin burden and whatever else, all the stuff that they didn't need to think about, so they could actually go and target and drill. Um, that was my role, my goal, and obviously, I think our management styles were different and complementary as well. Um, and yeah, I think that was really good. We like I said, we had a really diverse mix of backgrounds in that team, and I do think that was also a major ingredient in the success and the cohesion of the team. Um,
Yep.
yeah.
I agree. I really enjoyed and kind of going back to those targeting sessions, right? Where um it's very easy for people like myself who have the propensity to talk a lot, to talk over the voices of people who are quieter but who have really good opinions. And I felt like and maybe they have a different experience, but I felt like all those targeting sessions the people facilitating them did a really good job of drawing out everybody into the conversation, and that really kind of highlighted the strength of the team to me because like it just felt like it was like full contribution from all of these people across those multi-day targeting sessions, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it really was. I mean, I don't want to overstate it, but it really felt like, in hindsight, I didn't appreciate it at the time, but it felt like um, kind of a really world class kind of conference, like a targeting conference. You had, like I said, you had industry experts from all around the country and universities, and also people from from the corporate office and people with a lot of experience, all come together with all their specializations together at one time with phenomenally managed data sets. That's the other thing I should mention. I've come to
Yes.
appreciate the management of a data set is not to be sneezed at. It's all very well to have 20 years of exploration history on your lease package, but if the data is not managed well, that's completely irrelevant. And the same applies for 60 years plus of geophysics and
Mhm.
every level, everything. Yeah, managing your data well is another really critical part of the puzzle.
So Dale, one of the questions I guess I wanted to ask you at the start, which I kind of forgot about, was you mentioned your I guess protracted history with goldfields was like you went through multiple discoveries during this history. Did you ever do you ever sit down and think about how they were all different in the way? Like, like what did you learn
Mm,
from one to,
yeah,
like what were the mistakes in one that you tried not to repeat in the other one as you kind of went along these subsequent discoveries? The reason why I wanted to ask that question is that like we talked about this in previous episodes that like a lot of things in Invincible seem to run really well, and like they ran very smoothly, and I think it was evidence of the fact that how quickly it went from discovery to kind of production. Yeah, so to me, my like hypothesis there is really that, like as a group, you guys had matured through
yeah,
multiple discoveries and kind of
yeah,
development. Because like it's unlikely you get it right in the first try. So I'm curious to know, like, what did you kind of learn from like the discovery
yeah.
part gone
It's
through?
interesting because my exposure was less, and so I shouldn't say it's a resource drill out because you still learn every single hole you put into a new discovery, you learn more about it, right? But there really was, like I mentioned before, there was really a concerted effort to ensure that the people who were working on the greenfields targets were were given the real experts in that in those particular skill sets were still free to do that. And so often, what would happen, like after the Hamlet Discovery program, um, I think we all knew immediately looking at the results, like almost exactly what, like we knew what orientation the structure was, we knew how wide it was, we knew where it was going, and the decision was then, right, great, let's give that immediately to the drill out team because the Athena drill out team was just winding down, and so the timing was kind of perfect. Is that we just quickly rotate them into this new position and then proceed. And so I guess in terms of that aspect, I didn't really have I guess the chance to have any regrets or any, I guess, too many learnings, other than the fact, as I mentioned earlier, around trying to maintain funding for new targets and new projects all the time. Um, and yeah, that was always a little source of tension. The mill, Aaron touched on this as well, is like the mill on that site is a hungry beast. It needs 500,000 ounces a year, and it needs a specific blend of underground and open pits grade material really to function at its best efficiency. And that's not to be sneezed at year in, year out. You've got to replace that loss. 500,000 ounces per annum. That's just about as fast as you can define these things. Um, and so I've got to give shout out to, we talk about discovery all the time, and we like the glory is we always think about the glory of the greenfields discovery, but if you look at the number of ounces added, it's almost always the production teams. So people like Dave Douch at Cave Rocks, who basically go in there and go into bat, and every day, day in, day out, he would be there putting in really hard yards to get every single economic ounce out of this deposit. Like it was a super complex deposit, super narrow, high grade veins that were nothing like any other deposit we had on site. And that's the other thing, I guess, while it comes to mind, though it's not necessarily relevant, but is talking a bit before about, I guess, learning. And we were always told to look for, like, what analog is this you're searching for? The only thing I can say is every mine site that I had the chance to look at closely was only an analog of itself. It never, almost never ever was
Yeah,
directly the same
yeah,
as another
yeah.
one.
Every time, I think the more you look at deposits, instead of the more similarities, you find more differences, and then they all
Yeah,
kind of seem to correlate into their own clusters.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how wise that strategy ends up being at the end of the day.
So in
And
terms of discovery, the number of ounces discovered you could attribute to production geos working in near mine
Yeah, yeah.
extensions is not to be overlooked because those are the people that keep the mines going. That's the reason why St Ives is still operating now and will continue to operate because someone's got a fundamental understanding of their ore body and they will do everything they can to make sure it's extracted efficiently. So
I think that's the beauty of it, right? You think about somewhere like Invincible, where as the production geos are mining along and you encounter things like, like the low angle extension veins, which are extremely difficult to model, and therefore they're probably going to be either underestimating ounces or overestimating ton. There's all these
Mm.
challenges, right? And they had to make decisions on the fly on how they're going to go about mining these things and extracting it to the max. And I don't know, I think that's one of my favorite part about, like, different jobs over the years I've done is seeing just how good some of these teams are at maximizing their ore bodies, and, like, they never get credit, right? Like,
No, no,
there's
no, no.
never credit.
And it's usually
So,
it's usually very hard work too. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and it's extremely high pressure, right? Where it's like, like the drill's waiting for the geo to sample a face, and
Mm.
"You gotta get out of there," and it's like, but they're trying not just to sample, but like if they're on geo line, they're trying to decide how to steer things and how they might, come back on the next pass, and and I always look at that as like, it's such an art for production geos, and it's one of the most unsung parts of our industry. And so it's
Yeah.
good you mentioned them, because I
Yeah, yeah,
think,
yeah.
like, yeah, at the end of the day, they're the ones feeding the mill, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. It's very easy for me to wash my hands at an inferred resource or indicated resource. So, yep, I've found it. There it is. Go and mine it. And then lo and behold, it's a bit more complicated, turns out, when you actually
yeah,
get to the rock.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good thing, like you talked about, early in your career doing production, and same thing for
Mm.
me is I like, you start to learn what an ore deposit looks like, I'm not sure if I've mentioned this on the podcast yet, but I years back, I did a talk, and I was supposed to talk about geological modeling and all this, and I created a geological model of an apple,
Mm.
and I said, like,
In
one of
Leapfrog?
the things we what's that?
Is
Yeah,
it
in
in
Leapfrog,
Leapfrog?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
perfect for it.
yeah, and yeah, it's, like, ideal. It's harder to make a banana, and so I made the point, though, of everybody in this room knows what an apple looks like, right? So if we go to model one, we know where it's gonna fall over at, because we can tell it doesn't look right, right? But if you've never worked in an ore deposit, you don't know what it looks like. How are you gonna model it, right? And I think it's really a disservice to a lot of exploration geos that they've been told that production geos don't think and they don't have to figure these things out, and they're just kind of automatons. Like, I've actually heard, like, conversations like that,
Oh, no.
and I'm like, no, no, no. Like, when you work in an ore deposit, you understand the complexities. You understand how important geotech is. You understand how important it is to see the overall picture of, like, vein geometries and not necessarily, this contact, right? Because maybe this contact is like this, but internally it's completely deformed. And so you might make a completely bogus model because, you're just looking at one small aspect of data, right? Like, one 5 centimeter drill hole,
Yeah,
is it
yeah,
doesn't tell you hardly anything compared to, like, a 5 meter drill hole, as you're going down a drift, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
so,
And the most pertinent advice, the best advice I think I got from anyone was from John Donaldson, who said, "You know what? There's an old saying is like, don't assume you know more than the person at the rock face, right? And when you go down underground and you're talking to, a jumbo operator or something, this guy lives inside a gold deposit 12 hours a day. And so if he's mentioned something which is an observation, which is a valid observation, don't dismiss it. He's probably making that observation for a reason, I think that was really good advice, and you can apply that to people at a core farm who are moving core trays or wherever you are. Yeah, don't just dismiss it. And I've learnt that. I mean, since moved on to a different role, I'm not in exploration anymore. But yeah, don't dismiss if a mine site is giving me data, giving me information. Don't just dismiss it because I've got a different observation. You should figure out why our interpretation is different. And I've found times when I need to change my methodology or my model of thinking or approach to a situation because of that.
Yeah, that's a very good
yeah,
point.
I'd always heard, like, he who sees the most rocks wins, and you think about that, nobody sees more rocks than miners, right?
Mm.
It's such an easy thing to dismiss, and I know when I used to do production, I enjoyed talking to the miners, and, yeah, like, there's too many jokes I probably can't tell because 'cause we'd have to mark it extra explicit, but, but it was fascinating, like, they would mock geology all day long, but they were looking at the rock, and they would, if you were nice to them and you treated them respectfully, they would make suggestions to you and be like, "Hey, like back here, I saw the rocks kind of going over here like this. Have you seen that?" And you're like, "Oh no, I actually
Yeah,
totally
that
didn't
hanging
see
wall's
that. Let me."
drifting left in the last cut. It pulled this way for this reason, and it's like, "Oh, okay, that's
Yeah,
interesting. I'm gonna go back and check my wireframe and check my model and check if have we got a drill hole in this area that tells us something about that." And the other thing, just while I remembered as well, is interesting. Working in underground mine at Argo, Dolerite hosted us. I mentioned, and we all know it was on this one zone, this magnetic zone, this granophyric zone of Dolerite. But the highest grades in the mine were not in that zone. They were actually adjacent to the sediments, the black flag sediments. And whenever you had this occurrence of um, three separate sulfides together, if you had pyrrhotite pyrite and arsenopyrite together, the grades were off the charts. And I always wondered why that was. And then lo and behold, later on, when we looking at these, these really, how do we get the genetics of an ore deposit? It's to do with reduced fluids and oxidized fluids meeting together, and the reduced fluids are coming from the sediments. And so, after being told for so long, let's please ignore all these sediments, suddenly it's like, well, actually, this could be a really interesting ingredient. And I only made that connection like long after the fact of working underground. Is like,
yeah.
oh, maybe that's why the gold grades was so good next to the black flag sediments. Yeah.
And I don't know, I've thought about this a lot, where what I learned, I think, the most at St. Ives was question assumptions, right? And it's really stayed with me ever since. Question everything, right? Like, start looking into it and being like, "Well, why is this the way it is? And do we actually know as much as we think we do?" Which I know has driven many people I work with insane over the years. Because it's really been, I don't
But
know,
back to
like
that
a key
investment,
takeaway to me.
the getting the architecture right. I mean, if those are good questions, what do we need to do to answer them? And then so you bring in a geochemist and you bring in a renowned industry expert and you get them to think about it and you give them a project, Merriwear project or a CSIRO project in Australia. I'm going to be using the Australian analogs, or a CIC Lean project or a Mira project, whatever they are. We had all of those for all different parts of that, from the very top soil, we were looking at satellite data to all the way down through the regolith to the transported material to the everything. And yeah, and yeah, trying to answer those fundamental questions, and then yeah, back that up with a sustained investment in exploration. If you want to have a mine operating when the gold price hits $5,500 an ounce, you need to discover it 8 years before then. Not it's too late to it's by the time you drill it out, the gold price will have changed and moved on again. You need to look at it like a casino looks at this. It's a sustained investment. You might lose some days. You might some weeks you might get ripped off by some card counter, but over the year you're going to make a lot of money. And the same
Yeah.
with exploration over a long period. If you do the right thing and you have the right ground, you're going to make money. That's my belief.
I was gonna ask you, what did you learn from this time that kinda stayed with you the rest of your career so far?
Um, from a simplistic point of view, I haven't learned so much, but I still maintain, and I say this all the time in my current role, that maintaining sample integrity, right? Tracking a sample from when it comes out of the ground through whatever work process you're doing, it seems to be the hardest thing that humans have ever attempted. I don't know why. The ways that this can go wrong, I've seen I've actually had I lost whole RC programs because we had a bad fieldy, and they couldn't put Humpty Dumpty fell off that wall. We could not put the pieces back together. It was gone. No one could figure it out. It was random, I see that all the time. Manage your data carefully, please, guys. And also, the second point, obviously, and maybe a bit more seriously than that, is uh, the I mean the job satisfaction that you feel when you're working in a good culture doesn't have a dollar value attached to it. And I'm very fortunate. I'm working in a role now where I consider that to be the case as well. But also, I think it's very easy to say it's an Ives. I definitely, yeah. Not all remuneration is just in your bank account. Really appreciate the people you work with, and yeah, I think those are the main things I guess I could say. Yeah, don't if as the commodities go up and down, don't just jump ship every five months, or think about what you really value from your role.
I think this is something companies can also pay attention to, is that the only currency people are after, people are after, not the only currency they're after is not just money, right? Like they're after other things as well.
Yeah.
So, and I think companies may remember that as well. In that, yeah, if you create I think a more positive culture, you can still attract people rather than just having to pay them like a multiple or something like that.
Mm.
So that's something they should remember as well, I think.
Definitely. And some it's gonna be different from person to person. Some people need, like, that academic fulfillment. Some people need, that real challenge and that driven to succeed in that way. Um, and just to touch on, I don't wanna downplay as well Aisha's, role. If Nick was the visionary who always Nick would always I was saying this to Scott earlier before the pod started, but when he would present a greenfields target, he wouldn't come to you with anything less than a 1,000,000 ounce target. And I'm a diehard optimist, but I would always say, "Are you sure?" And he said, You can't show me that it's not there." And I was like, "Well, you know what? You're damn right. I can't prove that it's not there. So it's still a valid target at 1,000,000 ounces or 2,000,000 or even 3,000,000 or 5,000,000. You need someone with the vision. You need someone with the vision in the team." And Aisha, I would say, contributed, I would say, ferocious determination to succeed in her role, to the point where she was so successful against the KPIs that we gave her. She would smash them out of the park every time. Um, and I had to come back to her and say, we can't let you have a perfect score because the management says you can't have a perfect score, but you got a perfect score, so I don't know what to do. And I would have arguments with my managers saying, you told her these were KPIs and she's exceeded all of them. So it's up to you to tell her that she didn't get her perfect score, sort of thing. So yeah, it was a fun team. It was a fun team to work with.
I think I think that's, like, the thing in hindsight that I look at is it was so many different high performers and so many different things, and some people were, like, had personal challenges, and some people had, like, they didn't get along and all that. I think for the most part, everybody figured out ways to work together, but I just have to say, like, for all the people that didn't make it in our interviews, um, I appreciate all of you guys because that was such a phenomenal experience to manage people that were so capable, and so that was like, I haven't talked about my role a lot in this podcast, but that was one of my absolute favorite parts of it was just seeing how capable people can be. It's
Yeah,
just
when you back
it's
them
a
up.
delight.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you go to all the trouble of, like, recruiting these people and then training them up, well, then resource them properly, and they're gonna do what you want them to do. So, yeah, I think that's yeah. Maybe if any companies out there are listening, yeah, take that on board.
So you decided that working across, what was it, 600 square kilometers was too big of an area, and so now you're working on microscopic areas as a mineralogist. So so
And it's
so what kind of
the irony being that I was, like, never really I guess I don't wanna say I looked down on that aspect of geoscience when I was an exploration geologist, but I did really in hindsight. It's like, "Oh, yeah, 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 minerals, yeah, they're in rocks. I know minerals. I've seen them before." But now, as you mentioned, my current role is, in a geometallurgy team, so I characterize very, very small rock particles, and provide feedback to people mainly in, processing environments rather than exploration environments, but, really diverse samples I get. I get all sorts of things, from, someone may have made a slag of something and they don't know what the hell's in it, and they're trying to recover rare earths from it or something, so I'll look at that or whatever. It could literally be anything from any part of any process stream, and we take a lot of, scanning electron microscope data primarily, but a bunch of other things as well. And yeah, the commonality between this role and the other role, obviously they're both science roles. I still make discoveries, but they're a little bit smaller. But the implications are massive, right? So if I can increase recovery of a metal by 1%, then the amount of millions of dollars that recovery 1% is really really big. So in a way, it's still discovering things, and it's still a scientific discovery, and like both is geoscience discoveries. But the commonality that I think is also between the two roles is, there's an ongoing joke in our office is like, when someone comes to you with a problem, no matter what it is, ask them this question, right? What is it that you're really trying to find out here? Don't ask me, like, you might ask me for an assay, but that's not the problem you're trying to solve. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? then I'll try and figure out how to how to resolve that, right? Tell me your problem and I'll come to you with the best way to solve it. So if the problem is we don't know our stratigraphy, well, let's figure out the best way to resolve that. We'll drill stratigraphic diamond hole. And in this role, it's the problem is like, don't come to me and say, just give me the modal mineralogy, just give me the numbers. I want the minerals in here in percentage. That's not the answer to the problem. The question that you're actually asking is, why is my recovery lower in this situation with this ore type, right? That's your actual question. And if you give me the correct question, I can give you the correct answer, and using the best method. The best chance of discovering the answer lies in understanding the question, I think.
I think that's a phenomenal point. Is if we trusted people more to say, let me help you answer the question as opposed to let me provide this little piece of data. I think we would go a long way with that. So that's actually really really profound advice to people is yeah, trust them with the full question you're trying to answer.
Yeah, yeah. And then we can come together and yeah, it's better for everyone.
Digging deep where the stories hide, through the hills and the mountains wide. Pickaxe swing and the earth unfolds, chasing dreams in the dirt and gold. Geology calling under our feet, secrets are buried in the rock and heat. With a heart full of wonder and a map in hand, exploring the treasures of this great land.